My name's Erin Shea, and I'm the head of adult programming here at Darien Library. Thank you so much for being here tonight as we continue our adult summer reading program. I hope you're all submitting reviews of books you've been reading for a chance to win our grand prize, an iPad, at our finale program on August 17th. I'd also like to mention that programs at Darien Library are made possible by contributions to our annual Friends of the Library campaign, so thank you for your continued support to make our collections and programs available to the community. Our guest tonight is the editor of 3 philosophy books, and his essays have appeared in The New York Times, The Daily Telegraph, The Guardian, and on NPR. But he is perhaps best known for his 2 short story collections, The Secret Lives of People in Love and Love Begins in Winter, which won the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award. He recently published his very first novel, and we are so lucky to have him here. Everything Beautiful Began After follows Rebecca, George, and Henry, 3 young people spending the summer in Athens, dealing with the demons of their past. I have to say that while I was reading this book, I had to stop and reread so many sentences because the beauty of the prose is just that startling. So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to Darien Library, Mr. Simon Van Booy.
Thank you very much. What a lovely introduction. We almost don't need to have an event. We could just have her introduce me for an hour. I'm glad to see that you've covered every single potential space in this. With intimate readings, it's nice because if we were ever stranded, we probably wouldn't break into warring factions. But I can see that's already started happening. So thanks for asking me to come. It's a pleasure. It's a beautiful library. It's a sort of place where nothing terrible could ever happen. It certainly seems that way. Maybe it's because it all happens in the books. We're all too exhausted. So I'm going to read a little bit from my novel, which came out a couple of weeks ago. And I'm going to read the prologue, which I was going to say comes at the beginning. But I realized, when you become a parent, you inherit, you become your parent, and then you realize that you've become your mother or your father. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life telling myself that I haven't become my mother or father. So if you do purchase the book, when you come to the end of it, go back and read the prologue, because the prologue is really the end. But I decided to put it at the beginning, and because it seemed neater. It seemed as though they were sort of the emotional bookends that I needed. Also, it has the double effect of if anything happens to you. Before you get to the end, you can say in your last words can be, at least you got to the end of it, at least you know what happens at the end. And so this is the prologue. Everything was already here, and I am the last to be born. Small questions fill her minds like birds circling. Skeleton trees, stripped of their flesh by frost, are changing again. Green tips harden at last year's final moments. She waits at the wild end of the garden, leaning on a gate in her coat, the one she wouldn't wear. But now everything about it seems beautiful, especially the buttons, small tusks discoloured by 1,000 meals, the mystery of pockets. At the farthest end of the wood, where no one comes, is where her life begins and ends. A sea of new grass will soon flood the fields beyond the gate. It's her birthday too. 10 years old, suddenly allowed to venture to the far gate alone, old enough to lie awake in her bed, listening to the applause of rain on the window. Even her dreams are older. Hair cascading, she digs with her father for treasure in faraway countries. Then, fleeing the storm of growing knowledge, she escapes into mourning and forgets. Her father is in the woods looking for her. Dinner is ready and waits in the pot to be eaten. Her mother is lighting candles with a single flame conjured by her eyes. Her father is out calling the name she's been given. But her real name is known only by the change in light that comes without sound, and by worms pushing out through the soaked crust of soil. They glisten and swing their heads in blind agreement. Her father raises them by tapping the ground with a stick. They think it's rain. Her father used to pretend he'd found her in the garden, that she wasn't his daughter but some creature of nature, that she appeared in the wake of a few early daffodils, that he pulled her from the ground the way he finds all ancient ruins, with luck and enthusiasm. Her mother has long hair. She ties it up behind her head in a soft nest. Her neck bears the silence and freshness of morning. Years have spun around her eyes. Her mouth is small and moves with the promise of kindness. Her father said that this morning that snow is coming, but in her mind it's falling fast. She can't stop it. Soon everything she thinks will be covered by what she hopes will happen. And at midnight she will peep through lifted corners and marvel at the glowing shroud. Sometimes when she cries out in the night, her father comes in. He holds her hand and rubs it until her eyes begin to soak, and slowly she sinks, leaving behind small questions that float on the surface of her life until morning. She knows she came from them. She knows she was held aloft, a hot screaming ball with tiny arms flapping. There was blood. She knows she grew inside. She knows that people grow each other. Once there was a tree upon which she found something growing, something shuffling inside a small silken belly webbed to the rough bark. A white sack. She visited her magic child with devotion. She spoke quietly and hummed songs from school. Words at their finest moments dissolve to sentiment. She couldn't be sure, but her child in its white womb was growing, and sometimes turned its body when she warmed it with her breath. She imagined one day a surprised face peering at her from inside. She would peel her glowing baby from the tree, give it milk and a matchbox crib until it was big enough to sleep in her room, and then, like all children, confess everything with questions. She imagined its tiny body wriggling in her hand, the black dot of an open mouth. But then one evening after supper, she went to her child on the tree and found the chrysalis was empty. The dreamlike skin, the gossamer veil, ripped open in her absence. She waited until dusk, until crows barked solemnly at that distant fire beyond their understanding. Her eyes were red too. She walked slowly through the garden to the house. Just as she was too afraid to tell anyone she had borne a child, she was now too afraid to share her grief. One day in summer, she lay against a tree, her heart full of emptiness. A butterfly landed on her bare knee. Its wings rose and fell, two eyes staring at her in their blindness, her eyes staring blindly back. Nature's victory is seamless. She can hear her father now. His voice is clear and sharp. It rings through the damp trees. There was a time before he met her mother. It was before she began. It was a shadow world with no significance, a world that was breathing but without form. She hadn't even been thought of. She was dead without having died. As her father calls out to her now at the edge of night, she wonders how he found her mother. Did he call her name in the dark woods? Did it echo through him before he knew her, like some lost science of attraction? She will ask tonight over dinner for the story of what happened. Do we love before we love? She knows her mother fell, not from the sky like threads of lightning silently over hills, but in a place called Paris. Her camera in pieces, spots of blood on the steps. Her father is very close now. She considers falling to the earth, but instead remembers her name, a hook upon which she is carried through the world. On the walk back home through the dusk, she's going to ask her father for the story of how he met her mother. All she knows is that someone fell, and that everything beautiful began after. So that's the prologue, and of course it's a nod also to the idea of post-lapsian man, which is a very, I just like saying post-lapsian, but because I didn't know what it meant for a long time, and then somebody explained the term, and I believe it means after the Judeo-Christian fall of man, and that's when all the good stuff happened. I know they were sent east of Eden, and thank God Steinbeck was around too. But so for her too, it's the idea that everything beautiful begins after the fall. Is the idea of the, as the French poets believed, of flowers of evil, of that from suffering and from discomfort comes knowledge and enlightenment. So, if you'll permit me, I'll read a couple of pages from the beginning of the book that introduces the place. And, as a writer, my influences are quite diverse. I recently saw a film by Woody Allen, Midnight in Paris, which is just charming. And, a lot of the characters, are quite two-dimensional, but they're just wonderful. And it's amazing how Owen Wilson is able to become Woody Allen. I think he must have aged himself out of starring in his own films. But Paris is certainly a character in that film, and in a lot of Woody Allen's films, of course, New York City is a character. And that's one of the reasons I moved to New York 11 years ago. It's embarrassing to say there was no great revelation, or I just saw a Woody Allen film, and I said, "Who are those people?" And they said, "Oh, that's New York." I said, "They're New Yorkers." I said, "They just sit around talking about art and pontificating about, and they date until they're in their 50s." And they said, "Oh yeah," so I decided that's it, I'm moving there. And it was just like it was in the films. So you know when you've been in New York too long, because you say things come out of your mouth when you're driving that shouldn't come out of anybody's mouth. Chapter 1. For those who are lost, there will always be cities that feel like home, places where lonely people can live in exile of their own lives, far from anything that was ever imagined for them. Athens has long been a place where lonely people go, a city doomed to forever impersonate itself, a city wrapped by cruel bands of road, where the thunder of traffic is a sound so constant it's like silence. Those who live within the city itself live within a cloud of smoke and dust, for like the wild dogs who riddle the back streets with hanging mouths, the fumes linger, dispersed only for a moment by a breath of wind or the aromatic burst from a pot when the lid is raised. To stare Athens in the face is to peer into the skull of a temple. Set high above the city on a rock, tourists thread the crumbling passageways, shuffle across shrinking cakes of marble worn by centuries of curiosity. Outside imagination, the Parthenon is nothing more than stacked rubble. And such is the secret to life in a city ravaged by the enthusiasm for its childhood. Athens lives in the shadow of what it cannot remember, of what it could never be again. And there are people like that too. And some of them live in Athens. You can see them on Sunday mornings with bags of fruit, walking slowly through the rising maze of concrete, adrift in private thoughts, anchored to the world by unfamiliar shadows. Most of the apartments in Athens have balconies. On very hot days, the city closes its million eyes as awnings fall, drowning the figures below in dreams of shade. From a distance, the white plaster and stone of the buildings glow, and those approaching the city from the sea on hulking boats witness only a rising plain of glistening white, details guarded by the canopy of sharp sunlight that sits over the city until evening, when the city slows, and then a quick blush that deepens into purple, veils the sea, becomes night. In this city of 1,000 villages, families huddle on balconies with their feet on bare stools, with their bare feet on stools. Lonely men dot the cafes, hunched over backgammon. They stare at the ends of their cigarettes, lost in the glow of remembering. It's a city where people worship and despise one another in the same breath. For the lost souls of this world, Athens is a place not to find themselves, but to find others like them. In Athens you'll never age. Time is viewed in terms of what has been, not what is to come. Everything has already happened and cannot happen again, even though it does. Modern Athens buzzes around truth that everyone believes but no one can remember. As a visitor, you must simply find your own way through the foul, dry streets, where dogs follow at a distance close enough to be menacing, and walls still gape where smashed by missiles of ancient wars. And the lingering smoke and bustle, the strange music of the Laterna machine, the forever pushing of strangers. Museums are crammed with moments that went missing from history, that are impossible to put back, that were discovered by the thump of a plough, or hoisted up from wells, or dragged in tangled fishing nets along the seabed. Mossy heads, stone hands teeming with barnacles, rotten oars, rowed by the current in the dream of where they were going. The beauty of artifacts is in how they reassure us we're not the first to die. But those who seek only reassurance from life will never be more than tourists, seeing everything and trying to possess what can only be felt. Beauty is the shadow of imperfection. Before Rebecca moved to Greece to develop as a painter, she flew around the world serving meals and drinks to people who found her beauty soothing. Thousands possessed the memory of her neckline, the deep blue of her uniform, the smooth edges of her navy heels, a tight bouquet of crimson hair. She moved in straight lines, always smiling, a mechanical swan wrapped in blue cotton. In the mornings before work, she tied up her hair in a mirror. It was soft and always falling. She held bobby pins in her mouth and then applied each one like a sentence she would never say. Her hair was dark red, as though perpetually ashamed. So that's Rebecca. Who has an interesting role in this story. If you do manage to acquire a copy of the book, you won't be disappointed because it's also full of original artwork by my latest collaborator, no, not Alexander McQueen, but a 6.5-year-old, 6 3/4. She's earned that extra quarter. 6 3/4-year-old illustrator here, who's painted a grand piano that washed up on a beach in Deauville, which was once the Hamptons of Paris. And so that's quite good, isn't it? To me it looks like scribble, but to art critics of the Louvre, it's the next big thing. And I have to tell you, it wasn't always a happy collaboration. A lot of early nights. But after 15 consecutive dinners at McDonald's, and that's Scottish, not a Scottish restaurant, is it? I had artwork, though here you can see there's also a drawing by, well, some of the point of view is from a 6-year-old mind. And it's actually, that was very difficult to write, because I realised that children naturally think in ways now which are far too sophisticated. I've almost outgrown the ability to be natural. And then I remembered that Picasso said that he spent his whole life trying to draw as he did when he was a child. So though no matter what I did, threats of murder even, me getting murdered, she wouldn't colour in the rest of the bed. So it's black. So if you do have a black magic marker, you have my blessing to colour in. Don't worry, there's only 20,000 other copies. But if I tell everyone,
she'll never know.
Yeah, I said, is it because of post-hydrogeny and its relation to Islamic architecture and its role in modern? And she said, no, it's just boring. And she insisted on using that little micron pen. Do you know the one with the little tip you can barely see? It's like a spider's leg. And so when I was conceiving of how to express a child's point of view, I realized that children don't rely on language maybe as heavily as we do. They appreciate the ambiguity of language in ways that a lot of adults actually do not. And children also express themselves through colour and through movement and through singing and in all these other ways. That, I was almost inspired to just start expressing myself through song. And then it would have my book would have been about a different kind of Greece. So you have original artwork, and you also have vintage hotel stationery from around the world here, which I bought in an auction on eBay. And from an estate in Texas. And what was interesting was I could see where this woman had been and when. She started traveling in the mid-30s, and then there was a break for obvious reasons. And then she began traveling again in the late 40s. And I have all this wonderful. I've looked up a lot of the hotels, and some are no more. The ones in Michigan, most of them are no more. But apparently Michigan was once extremely ritzy. So, I gave a reading once in Detroit, and the night before my reading, somebody had smashed one of the windows of the Barnes & Noble where I was, and they had they'd taken all the Harry Potter books. But then they found, the staff wandering around the shop, found the Harry Potter books in a pile next to the Harry Potter audiobooks. So the person who'd had them had seen the audiobooks and just dropped the books and taken the audiobooks. So, if anybody has any questions about writing the book or about the process, yeah.
Where did you move from to New York, and how hard was it to get your book published?
I moved from England. I was living on a farm, and it sounds better than it was. I lived in Greece. I lived in England for several months before moving here, but then before that I lived in Athens, and it was a very different city then. It was before the Olympics, and it was before they were planning for the Olympics too, so it was quite a dangerous city. But it was just wonderful. Just wonderful. Getting the book published was, it was and wasn't difficult. What I mean to say is for a long time I couldn't find an agent to represent me because all my books were 150 pages long, and they were books of short stories. And so agents said, well, we like your work, but we couldn't sell it, it's not commercial. And I thought, well, for me that's a good sign. And in a sense, for me writing is a very spiritual process. It's how I undo the knot of myself and then move on with my life. So this book is my gateway to freedom. This book has freed me from things that happened to me in the past several years so that I can move on and have new emotional experiences. Eventually, I think all writers find publishers eventually. I think it's inevitable. And I admire writers because people who aren't published, nobody would think any less of them if they didn't write. But they do it, and you do it. You sit there and you continually struggle with this form, and people don't understand why you're doing it. And you do it for the passion, for the madness, for the beauty, for the occasional joy. And I really admire that it takes a special kind of person to do that. I mean, when you get published, you have deadlines and you have royalty checks and things like that and parties. But when you're not published and you're writing, these are the people I admire the most, I have to say.
What did your agent tell you how many pages you should have? If 150 is it doesn't even come close. What did they give you a figure or a minimum?
Well, I thought 150 is like a French novel or a Russian short story.
Commercial success.
Yeah, and so, well, the agents just said write a novel, and I didn't, because I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to live my way, and I'm going to die my way, even if it's in a horrible situation. So I did it my way, which meant an extra 5 or 6 years of doing other jobs, other than doing, not writing jobs.
What was it like transitioning from writing short stories to writing a novel?
Oh, it was a nightmare. When a publisher bought the every time you hear that little thing, I'm getting an electric shock too. I'm only joking. And it's part of the Darien sense of humour. Actually, I can give you an electric shock with this. It was when my short stories were purchased by HarperCollins, a contract. I had also had a contract for a novel. So I thought, I'll give it my best shot, and it took longer than I thought. I was a year and a half late delivering it because I got to the end. I got to the end of the first book, which is about 200 pages, and I realised I'm only halfway. And I told my publisher it's going to be a longer work, and the book's 400 and something pages, and I begged these French flaps, and then the rough cut pages. Because with new technology, I think it's a much more tactile experience. But it was difficult to stay inspired, I think, is the answer that I'd like to. It was difficult to stay with a short story. You can stay inspired for it's like having a holiday romance with a short story. You're there, the sun, cocktails, buffet, Jimmy Buffett, dancing, no questions asked, and then you go home. And but with a novel, they come home with you, and it was very difficult. So for Rebecca, I have dresses that belong to Rebecca in my closet, and I have a perfume that she wears, and so I really had to get a sense of who the character was. So when so whatever happens to her, I feel her presence, I feel her loss, I feel whatever she's going through. So I think if you look in someone's closet, it's a very intimate experience. If you've lost a parent and you look in their closet, it can really be completely disassembling in a way. Shoes, the way they have that little curl, from everywhere they've been, everywhere they haven't been.
How would you say how did having a young daughter affect your writing process? I mean, besides the charming details she added to the book. Having a child has
changed my writing in the sense that what's at stake has changed. Because when there's really no vanity in parenting. You give them everything and they don't appreciate it until they're parents themselves. Now I'm worshipping my parents and I'm realizing what they went through. And my father came over and he left all the lights on in my apartment, turned everything on and said, "See, now I'm getting my revenge." But you realize that becoming a parent, you realize that you're a product of what's happened to you. And then you realize that everyone is really, to some extent, dealing with how they've been treated as children and what's happened to them. Being a parent, I think, has enriched my writing in a way that it never could have been enriched. Writing, for me, comes a very, very far second to parenting. And if ever I was faced with 5 children, I would immediately leave New York and we'd go somewhere like Wyoming or Kentucky. And, I would go mad raising them, but it would be much more worthwhile than anything I could ever write, I think. I think the day I put my writing before people is the day that my writing becomes empty and without any sincerity.
The novel takes place in the 60s, right?
No, in the 90s.
Oh, in the 90s?
Mm.
Okay. I was reading excerpts on Amazon.
Mm.
I don't own it yet.
In the Amazon, on Amazon.
On Amazon, reading excerpts. Rebecca was trained in the 90s.
Mm.
Is that right?
No, but in the 1960s, airline stewardesses were forced to retire at 35.
That's what I was reading. I thought it was about her.
Yeah.
It was just a historical.
Mm-hmm. And
stewardess thing.
right, and the first airline stewardesses were nurses,
Yeah.
which is good for hypochondriacs.
I have a question for you. I understood that many writers keep a notebook. Like if you observe something or you have an idea, you write it down and then maybe you come back to it later on. You could do something like that, have a file of interesting things. So like
I do.
strange experiences that happen to you.
Mm-hmm. I do, but I only do it when I'm preparing to write another story. So if I'm working on a story, I don't. It's as though it's as though I'm seeing you, but I'm not really looking. But if I was in that mode, I would be looking for those details that I could write down. And I feel like I trust 99% of my work is done by my subconscious mind, as for, the idea of a subconscious mind. I can barely do anything as a conscious man. I can manage to drive a car badly, occasionally make a cup of tea, warm up corn dogs, but I really feel that when I sit down I'm channeling a deeper part of myself. And that's the part where the writing comes from. I can write, certainly. I can write copy for a website or for a magazine, but it's not coming from that other place. It's like the difference between breathing and meditating. Or it's like the difference between... I actually don't know any more differences.
Did the novel require a lot of rewriting, but it's based on suggestions from the editors or whatever?
It did. I first submitted it. When I first submitted it, my editor said, I think you can cut 3 or 4 chapters. It was 550 pages. And there was a nightclub scene, there was a sex scene, which I know would interest you. And the art department have copies of it. And my editor said, if the chapters don't drive the story forward, you should cut them. There was a 30-page segment which is told completely from the point of view of a 6-year-old. My editor said that jars the story. And she said that really with a novel you want something that is, paced well, and that it reads and it's, you don't get bogged down in certain areas. And I thought it was good advice, and I followed it. I trust her. even when she's said things which I haven't agreed with, I've realised that they were right. I think behind every good writer is a really good editor. So I feel it's a team effort, really, to be honest.
Well, to the point of editing as well, you mentioned before that the writing comes very quickly to you, which I find surprising because your prose is so precise. What is it? Stream of consciousness, and then you edit after, or does it? Okay.
That's exactly it. Stream of consciousness, and then I edit after. I mean, I could never write in a cafe. It has to be in a tomb. It has to be in a dark room with one lamp, with no noise, and no distractions, no internet, no telephone, because I have to feel like I've got nothing to lose. And if I feel like I'm not connected to the world or dead, then I feel like I have nothing to lose. It's actually quite a good way to live, actually. There is a lot of editing. Punctuation is very important to me because it controls breathing in the story. And the last line of James Joyce's Ulysses, or the last chapter, is a continuous sentence, I think of 30 or 40 pages. And then the last line of the book is, yes, I said yes, I will, yes, which is the beginning of an interesting sexual experience for the woman, and the way he writes it with the absence of certain punctuation, he controls the reader's breathing, so it's as though we're having an interesting sexual experience, which of course is the conception of human life. So Joyce is very interesting for me as a writer, because he does things like that.
I'm sensing that you have been influenced by a lot of writers. Who would those be? And I'm wondering, like Faulkner, this
I know that I'm going to be gunned down for saying this, but I haven't read any Faulkner.
Who are your influences, and do you read someone current like Jonathan Franzen?
I read Anne Michaels, who I love very much, who wrote a book called Fugitive Pieces, about a Polish boy who's smuggled out of Nazi-occupied Poland by a Greek archaeologist. And that book is one of the reasons I moved to Athens. If you follow my life and where I've been, you'll follow the trail of what I've read. The beginning of a Walt Whitman poem begins, what the child sees, he becomes. I agree with that. Whatever I read, I sort of become. What I experience, I become in a way, or try not to. I read Marcel Proust, not because I understand it, but because it looks cool when because of his sentence structure, and because of there's something in Proust that I find very inspiring, which doesn't affect me when I'm writing. So Proust is almost, for me, a writer's writer. There's another writer called Janet Frame, a New Zealand writer. There was a film made about her life called An Angel at My Table. She was misdiagnosed with schizophrenia when she was 21, I think, and then institutionalized for several years. And then she won New Zealand's greatest literary prize on the eve of her lobotomy. And so the surgeon said, oh, Janet, you've got the same name as a famous writer. Did you know that? And she said, oh no, that's me, doctor. And then, of course, the lobotomy was cancelled, and she was kicked out of the because it made them look bad. And then she got a grant and went to London, and she was re-diagnosed in London as being pathologically shy. And that film, directed by Jane Campion, I think it's called An Angel at My Table, is a brilliant film. It's about Janet Frame's life. She met the Queen to receive her damehood, and she said to the Queen, she said they were wearing the same dress, and she said, oh, I like your dress, and the Queen said, oh, do you? Thank you very much. And she said, yes, the pattern is the same as my dress. And the Queen said, "Oh yes, isn't that a coincidence?" And then Janet Frame said, "Yes, but I bought mine in a thrift store." And so she was a very unique kind of person. And I suggest you read her books. There was one love of her life for a few weeks, and then that was all in terms of marriage. And she lived quite an isolated. I think 3 of her sisters drowned when she was young. So Janet Frame, Bruce, James Joyce. I've been reading the non-fiction of Alain de Botton, who wrote a brilliant book called The Architecture of Happiness, and it's about how our surroundings influence us and how often we find ourselves not happy in a place where the architecture doesn't reflect our spiritual or political ideals. So that's interesting, isn't it? It talks about how modern German architecture, modern government offices in Germany are often, they're transparent, there's lots of glass, almost to symbolize, the transparency of their operation, of their administration. And it talks about fascist art in Italy. And it's really a brilliant book. It's also got pictures, which I like. Other writers, painters I like. And I like other people who aren't really connected to literature, like Jimi Hendrix or Yves Saint Laurent, who said, the most beautiful thing a woman can wear are the arms of the man who loves her. But until then, she has me.
You like Picasso then?
Picasso, yeah, is very interesting. I have all these anecdotes about these painters, but when the Nazis looked at his Guernica, which was, I believe, a criticism of their bombing of that island, they said to Picasso, "Did you do this?" And he said, "No, you did." I'm not sure I would encourage any of you to date him.
Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you very much.